The specimen arrived in a refrigerated crate the size of a coffin, and Dr. Reina Vasquez thought it smelled like the end of something. She'd requested the delivery herself. 8 months of correspondence with the Kerath Biological Survey, 14 rounds of clearance through the Colonial Science Exchange, and one very expensive bribe disguised as a processing fee, all for a single preserved organism pulled from the deep-water trench near Sigma Station. The Kerath called it a relic species, unchanged for 600 million years. No evolutionary pressure had touched it. It simply endured, blind and cold, in the dark beneath the ice shelf. Reina had a different name for things like that. She called them warnings. She ran the xenobiology department at Harwick Station, a cramped research installation orbiting the moon Kala, and her specialty was what she called evolutionary archaeology. The study of life so old and so stable that it had essentially stopped being life in any active sense and started being something closer to a record, a document written in protein and bone. Everything the universe had once tried and abandoned. The specimen was roughly the size of a large dog, armored in overlapping scales the color of old pewter, with 4 vestigial limbs and a jaw designed for a water pressure that no longer existed in this part of the system. She had the techs run the standard decontamination sweep, and then she sent them home. She wanted to be alone when she opened it. She pulled on her gloves, 2 layers, as protocol required, and unsealed the preservation unit. The smell hit her immediately. Cold salt water. Something older underneath it, something almost mineral. She leaned in close to examine the jaw structure and felt the edge of a scale catch the seam of her glove and nick the skin beneath. A small thing, a scratch. She pressed her thumb to it, applied pressure, went back to work. By the time she reached her apartment block, she had a headache that felt like weather moving in. By morning she had no memory of the headache, or of anything else from the previous 6 hours, and her desk chair was on the far side of the room where she did not remember putting it. She filed it as stress. She was not by nature an alarmist. The first indication that something was wrong, genuinely wrong, structurally wrong, came not from Reina but from her graduate assistant, Pell, a 23-year-old from New Cascadia who was afraid of almost nothing and deeply attentive to almost everything. He found the specimen container cracked open, one of its display tanks shattered out rather than inward, and in the middle of the debris a single massive footprint pressed into a soft foam floor mat that hadn't existed, as far as he knew, in that part of the lab at all. He measured the footprint with his palms spread wide and still had room at both ends. He did not call security, he called Reina. She came in, looked at the damage, looked at the footprint, and said nothing for a long time. The tank broke from inside, Pell said. I know. Something with a very large hand. I know. Dr. Vasquez. He waited for her to turn and meet his eyes. Where were you last night? She told him she had been in her quarters. She believed this. She had evidence of it. A login time to her personal terminal, a food delivery receipt. The normal texture for an evening she couldn't quite make sharp in her memory. She told him this too. He nodded slowly. He was young enough to still believe that facts lined up given time, and she was old enough to be afraid they didn't. She went back to the specimen. The scales along its jaw were still intact, but the preservation fluid had degraded around the wound site, and under the microscope she found what she was looking for. A compound she had never seen classified, something that behaved like a retrovirus, but read under analysis like something far older than any known pathogen, something that predated the concept of infection because in the era it originated from. Every organism it encountered had already been shaped by it. It was not an invader. It was, in a very specific molecular sense, a homecoming. Her lab notes from that session were meticulous, precise, and written in handwriting that was not quite her own. The Kerath liaison arrived 2 days later, and his name was something that translated loosely to third auditor of the first water. And Reina disliked him immediately, on the grounds that he watched her in the particular way that bureaucrats watch things they already own. His name, for the purposes of human interaction, was Siveth. He was tall, bifurcated in the torso in the way of his kind, with pale sensory filaments along the outer jaw that pulsed faintly when he spoke. He wore the survey's standard gray and Vero suit, but the way he moved inside it suggested he found the whole arrangement mildly insulting. The specimen is mission critical to the survey's current research phase, he told her. Standing in the center of her lab with the particular posture of someone who has never had to ask for a room. We will be taking custody of the biological data, as well as any secondary samples your team has collected. Raina did not look up from her workstation. You gave the specimen to us. We loaned it for preliminary classification. The exchange terms were clear. The exchange terms also specified that any novel biological compounds discovered during examination belong to the station under the Kala Research Compact. You can review the document. I have it. A pause. The filaments along his jaw moved. Dr. Vasquez, you have been working with material that operates well outside your classification range. We are offering to take that burden from you. She looked up then. She had a bruise on her left forearm that she didn't remember getting, extending from the inside of her elbow to the wrist, the shape of fingers pressed hard. She'd been wearing long sleeves for 2 days. I appreciate the offer, she said. The answer is no. He left. She pulled up the compound analysis on her secondary screen and stared at it for a long time, her thumb pressed to the small scar on her palm. What the compound did, at its most reductive, was this. It read the genetic history of its host like a library, and it opened old doors. Every organism at the molecular level carries a record of what it used to be. These are not active instructions. They are more like annotations in the margin of a very long book. Notes about past editions, about structural choices that were made and then revised, about capabilities that were shelved in favor of something more useful. The compound didn't create anything new. It unlocked what was already there. In Raina's case, it unlocked something that had been shelved for approximately 2 million years. She worked it out over 4 days of careful analysis, cross-referencing her own recent blood work against the compound's documented behavior in the station's tissue samples. She worked it out with the same methodical precision that had gotten her the department marcher at 38, the same refusal to be surprised that had made her a good scientist, and, her ex-husband had once noted, an exhausting person to live with. She worked it out and she sat with it and she thought, all right, the regressions lasted 4 to 6 hours. They were triggered by re-exposure. She had been re-exposed twice without knowing it. Once through a nick on her hand, and once she now understood through her pipe, which she'd set down too close to the specimen's drainage tray. The compound was not aggressive. It was patient. It waited for opportunity, and it did not need much. She reviewed the security footage she'd quietly pulled from the external corridor and watched herself leave the lab at 2 in the morning, walking like something that had not yet decided how to distribute weight across a bipedal frame. And she thought, well, this is information. Sevath filed a formal requisition for the specimen's research data on a Tuesday, citing survey protocol, and on Wednesday 2 of his colleagues appeared in the loading bay with a cargo drone, and what appeared to be a legal transfer order that had been, on close inspection, signed 3 weeks before the specimen had arrived at Harwick Station. Raina had been expecting something like this. She had spent the previous 48 hours doing something the Kerath Survey likely did not anticipate, which was that she had been doing science. The compound she had discovered was not unique to this specimen. It was present in trace form in the Kerath's own biology, not active, not triggerable under normal circumstances, but there in the margins of their genome the way it was there in hers, which meant the survey knew exactly what the specimen could do, which meant they had sent it to a human research station on purpose, because they wanted to know what it did to humans, which meant they already knew what it did to Kerath, which meant they had run this test before, which meant there were records, which meant there was data she did not have. She requisitioned the data from Sevath with a politely worded, formal request. He told her the data was survey property, and she had no standing to access it. She told him she had published a preliminary compound analysis that morning to the Colonial Science Exchange's open database, which meant it was now available to every research station, academic institution, and independent xenobiologist in the system, and that she had included in the methodology section a fairly clear description of where the compound had come from and who had delivered it. You had no authorization to publish preliminary findings, he said. The Kala Compact gives me full publication rights for any novel biological material examined under station auspices. You might want to review the document. I have it. The filaments along his jaw had gone very still. Dr. Vasquez, he said, you are not understanding the scope of what you are involved in. I understand it precisely, she said. That's the problem you're having. They came for her that night, two of Sevath's colleagues, and a security override she hadn't known the survey possessed. And they were very efficient about it. The way that organizations are efficient when they have done a thing many times before. She had been expecting this too. What she had done in the 6 hours between her conversation with Sevath and the moment his colleagues arrived was prepare the lab, send Pell home with a data package and very clear instructions, call her ex-husband, and tell him something she probably should have said 2 years ago, and then do the thing she had been doing the math on for 3 days. She injected herself with the compound, a measured dose, calibrated as carefully as she could, which was in the specific discipline of self-administered experimental xenobiology, more carefully than anyone else currently alive. She had not done this out of desperation. She had done it because she understood, better than anyone, what the record in her cells said. She had 2 million years of accumulated information about surviving things that wanted her dead, and she had figured out, finally, what the compound actually was. Not a weapon, not a punishment, not a mistake. It was the oldest immune response in the evolutionary record. A reset to factory settings. A return to the version of the organism that had survived everything. She let them in. What happened next she remembered in pieces. The way you remember weather, the shape of it, the weight, the smell of the air, not the individual raindrops. She remembered the light going strange, sodium yellow, and very close, like a sun she'd never seen. She remembered the smell of the corridor, processed air, plastic, something synthetic and thin, and underneath it the deeper smell of the station's steel bones, old metal, the particular cold of space pressing in through every wall. She remembered the size of her own hands. She remembered that she was not afraid. The survey's security techs were fast and professional, and equipped with restraint technology calibrated for Kerath physiology, which was not, in the specific and relevant dimensions, her physiology. She did not remember everything she did. She remembered the corridor lights going red. She remembered a door that had been locked that she walked through anyway. She remembered, at some point, the cold of the exterior access corridor and the sound of a hull alarm and the particular silence of Sevath's office at 2 in the morning. She found his data drives. She remembered that with perfect clarity, the sharp, purposeful moment of it, the way her hands moved with a certainty she hadn't felt in years. Sorting drives by material signature the way you sort cards by suit. Pulling the ones that had the right chemical density, the ones that had been used recently and often, the ones that smelled of use. And then she came back. She was sitting on the floor of her lab when the lights came on. Her left hand ached. Her right knee was bleeding from something she didn't remember. A long scrape across the kneecap, clean and already beginning to close. Her sleeves were pushed up, and the bruising on her forearm had changed. Lighter, like a storm that had passed. Pell was standing in the doorway. He looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the drives arranged neatly on her workstation. He looked back at her. "You want coffee?" he said. "Yes," she said. He made it, and they sat. And she told him everything, which took a long time, and which he listened to without interrupting, which was one of the things she had always valued about him. When she was done, he was quiet for a while, turning his mug in both hands. "The data," he said, "is ours. Under the compact. Sevath will argue. Sevath will have a difficult time making arguments once the Colonial Science Exchange's ethics board gets the publication I'm filing this morning." She paused. "Along with a formal request for an audit of the survey's previous research in this area. They'll call it theft. They'll call it whatever they want. We have the data." She looked at the drives. "And we have the compound analysis. And we have." She thought about what she was about to say, considered whether it was science or something else, and decided it was both. We have documentation of what it does. What it does when the dose is right. When someone understands what they're taking and why. He turned the mug again. And what does it do? She thought about the corridor. The locked door. The silence of her own mind, clear and cold and very old, working at problems the way that very old things work at problems. Not cleverly, not creatively, but with the absolute commitment of something that had been doing this for 2 million years, and had simply not been willing to stop. "It's not what they thought it was," she said. "They thought it was a weapon, something they could use to destabilize us, to study regression, to find the weakness underneath the civilization." She set her mug down. "But that's not what evolution does when it hits a floor. It doesn't regress. It compresses. Everything we've learned, everything we've built, it goes somewhere, it gets stored. And the thing underneath isn't what we were before we became this. It's what we'd be if we had to become something else instead. Pell was quiet for a moment. And what's that? Something that fends away, she said. That's all it's ever been. Siveth filed 3 formal complaints, 2 requisition orders, and 1 injunction that the Colonial Science Exchange's legal body declined to process on the grounds that it was predicated on data the survey itself had declined to disclose. His colleagues returned to their ship and left orbit inside 48 hours. He himself remained for 2 weeks, which Reyna considered a sign that she had worried him in some specific way that he had not yet fully processed, and she found this professionally satisfying. The data they'd recovered, 18 months of survey research conducted on other species, in 3 other systems, with 2 documented fatalities and a suppressed incident report that would eventually make the front page of the exchange's public board, took her team the better part of a year to fully analyze. The findings were published in 4 papers, all open access, all meticulously sourced. The Colonial Science Exchange cited them in its formal review of the Kerath Survey's research protocols. 2 of Siveth's supervisors resigned. Pell defended his thesis that spring. The second chapter was on compound transmission vectors, and the fourth was on what he called, in the abstract, the archival function of dormant evolutionary genetics, which was careful language for something that required less careful language to explain to a general audience, which he did in a follow-up piece he wrote for the popular science journal Kala Notes. He titled it, What We Kept. Reyna read it on a Tuesday morning with the second cup of coffee she allowed herself on good days. She read it slowly, with the attention she gave to things that mattered, and when she was done she sat for a while, with the empty mug in both hands and the view of the moon's pale surface out the window and the particular quiet of a lab before the techs arrived. She looked at her hands. They were her hands. 43 years of work visible in them, the small scar on the palm almost invisible now, the bruising long gone. They were not large. They were not especially strong. They had spent more time holding instruments than anything else. And they had the particular steadiness of hands that had learned, over a long time, and through a lot of small failures, exactly how much force to apply and when. She thought about the locked door. She thought, we have been keeping things for a very long time, she thought. They should have known better than to knock. She put on her coat and went in to work.